All right, it's time to begin. As you can hear, I got my microphone fixed. I just realized I didn't have the little fuzzy on there, and I just now realized why that's on there, because you can hear me breathe without that on there. So maybe I'll put that on for next week. We'll see. I have 3 microphones and only 1 fuzzy, so I have to figure out how to make that thing work through 3 mics. So anyway, we're glad you're here. If you've got your Bible with you, which certainly I hope you do, we're going to be in Numbers chapters 9 and 10 tonight. That's where we'll start in just a few moments. I'm not going to go through the update on the prayer list except for to remind us of the 2 additions that I talked about on Sunday, which is Marshall's sister is going through her chemo treatments now, and Jim Collins is in Orlando on the transplant list. Greg is, wait a second, we're past the 21st. Okay. I was hoping you just gave me the wrong date. Okay. So Greg has surgery on the 21st of October, and I don't have anything to write with, so you're going to have to remind me of that sometime, okay? Because you know that my memory works great. So, okay. Other than that, on the prayer list, I don't have any more. I do want to remind you of 2 things, and that is at the end of class, since we're not having our regular service where we have a devotional, at the end of class, before the prayer, I will remind everyone that if you need to meet with the elders or if you want to study or something of that nature, then we will talk to you after services are over tonight. So it's kind of an invitation with that, but not connected to a song. So we will do that. Also, on the roof, we have not heard yet if today changed, but they're still working on trying to get the permitting. So they were here on Monday to do some measurements and things of that nature. So we should be good to go as soon as the permit comes through, and they'll start working on that. So maybe things will be happening before you're here on Sunday. If they are, just please excuse whatever mess is in the parking lot at that time. Okay, anything else? All right, Marshall will get us started with a prayer, and then we'll begin our class. Okay, Numbers chapter 9. Let me review kind of to make sure that you remember. If you've been keeping up with this before we were able to come back to the building, and we had the online recorded classes, and then, of course, the last few weeks, you already know that going through the book of Leviticus and even especially the early part of the book of Numbers is quite challenging, not because, it's something difficult to understand. It's because it's difficult to teach, because it's hard to figure out what do we need to get out of this. And so what often happens is we just kind of skip sections, And I'm thankful that the way that our classes are set up here, our adult class, is with this chronological study that I'm kind of forced to stay in this schedule and cover some of these things because And I don't know why my mic is cutting out. It's brand new, so maybe I just haven't got it arranged right. I'm not sure. If it cuts out, I'll just talk louder. I know it's there for a reason, right? God recorded the Scriptures and preserved it the way that He did for a reason. And in the New Testament, Paul tells us that reason is for our learning. And that means that, maybe I don't understand it and know why it's there, but there's a reason it's there. And so my task as a student of the Scriptures is to try to find that reason for me. And especially as we get into the section we went through last week with the first 4 chapters of Numbers, and I know I summarized. I went ahead and summarized the end of Leviticus, and then I also did the first 4 chapters of Numbers. What I was talking about is I was specifying about not only their laws in the end of the book of Leviticus, but in the beginning of Numbers, it was talking about their travels, how it was they were to camp, how it was that they were to take down the tabernacle and all those elements, and how it was that they were actually to travel. Because you remember, we've got over 600,000 men, right? And then if you estimate, which is what you have to do, the number of women and children, many people estimate that, there might be as many as 2 million or more of the Israelites who came out of Egypt and now are at Mount Sinai. And by this point, by the time you get to the book of Numbers, they've been there for about a year, and be even more, right? And I realized there also were some deaths. There were some people that died as a result of the golden calf, right? So I know there have been some deaths, but there's been some births. But we realize this is a large crowd. Okay, I just want you to consider, I don't know what city I should compare it to. How big is the city of Jacksonville? Does anybody know? Is it a couple million? Miami's bigger than that. Okay, just imagine whatever town you could imagine, 2 million people in a town. Can you imagine everybody in that town packing up and traveling together somewhere? And what you would need is organization, right? And so God provided that for them. And even as they would have to camp, there'd have to be some organization, right? And so God provided that. But I also want you to think about the fact of, guy number 1, they journeyed kind of in a parade, if you will. They weren't just this big, it didn't look like, 8-year-old soccer where they just all run around like a cloud in one group. This was a line. This was like a parade. They went in their tribes. So you have that many people. Guy number 1 is going to be quite a bit ahead of guy number 2 million, right? So that you have to recognize every journey is going to be a pretty lengthy parade as they travel throughout wherever it is that God takes them. And so the point that I start to get from all of that organization is not, specific point of God saying, I want this done this way because this is the difference between right and wrong. I think it's God saying to them, I know how to lead you. I know how to get you where you need to go. I know how to minimize the problems that you have. And if you choose to walk with me, then those problems are going to be less. And I'll help you overcome the ones that are there. And the lesson I need to gain from that is it's no different for us, is it? And I'm not talking about God saying, like on Sunday mornings when we dismiss and I say this group and then this group. I'm not saying God saying, well, if you do it that way, you have less problems. No, what I'm saying is as I journey through life, what faith means to me is the more I learn about God's Word, the more He's giving me the direction on how to journey through life. And what I ought to gain from these Old Testament examples in their organization is, as long as I learn to follow that, then I lessen in life, right? And the more that I go away from what me, the more problems that I have in life, right? Okay, so as we get into Numbers chapters 9 and 10 now, we're actually kind of backing up just a little bit. In the first 4 chapters of Numbers, we were in a time frame at the beginning of their second year there, and that's where we are again. But that went further than that, so now we back up again into that first month, and we're going to get something. And what we're going to get is Passover. Their departure from Egypt. When they leave Egypt, what's happened is they've had that 10th plague, right? The last plague, which is the death of the firstborn, and God had given them specific instructions about how to avoid that death. And that is, He told them to be inside. First, they had to be in the house, right? And what was outside the house? Blood. Yeah, the blood of that lamb, the Passover lamb, was put on the doorpost, and if you had a family large enough, you had to eat that whole thing on the night. If your family wasn't, then you could join with your neighbor and be in their house, and the blood would still be there, and then you would eat that lamb. Nothing was to be kept overnight, and you were to be dressed for your journey and have your staff in your hand. I mean, you're supposed to be ready to go so that when God says it's time to go, you go. But they did take something to eat with them, just not the lamb. Does anybody remember what they took with them? Unleavened bread. That's all they had. They could take this unleavened bread out with them, and they had to take that. That's what God told them to take. And so as they journeyed to that, and he said to them, this is Passover. And so I want you to have this day and feast. There was a Passover day, and there was a feast, a Passover feast, if you will, or a feast of unleavened bread. That's where that name came from, that was supposed to connect back to that Passover. And they're supposed to keep remembering that. So they've been out of Egypt now for a year, right? They're in the beginning of their second year, and what's happening to them is it's coming time to have that Passover. What God had told them is in the first month, on the 14th day, here's what you're to practice. So as they're getting close, they've had a long year, haven't they? I mean, they journeyed for a while, but even once they ended up at Mount Sinai, God's given them all these laws. It's got to feel a little bit overwhelming. On top of that, they have been working, haven't they? And they built all of these elements of worship, and they built the tabernacle and everything that had to go along with it. And so it's been a pretty busy, overwhelming year for them. And now they start this second year, and in the first month, and God says, now I want you to stop, and I want you to remember how we got here, what happened, because I want this to keep going. So chapter 9 starts us with that. Chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, let the children of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month, at twilight, you shall keep it at its appointed time. According to all its rites and ceremonies, you shall keep it. So Moses told the children of Israel that they should keep the Passover. And they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did. Now, that's really very simple, right? All we know is it's early in the first month of their year, of the second year after they've been out of Sinai, and God says to them, you have to keep the Passover. And then the summary of that is that one simple statement right at the end of what I read, which was what? They kept it. And they kept it exactly like God told them to keep it. Now, I emphasize that, and we're going to see that, maybe not in the exact wording, but we're going to see it in their act. Go through this chapter and the next chapter. I want to emphasize, I think that sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, I think that sometimes we get to Kadesh Barnea, which is coming up real close. We're real close to the time that they go to that place called Kadesh Barnea. And that's when they send in these spies. And the spies come back and they say, we can't take the land. And it wasn't just the spies. 10 of them said that. It wasn't just the spies. The emphasis in the account, as we'll get to it, is that all of Israel believed them. All of Israel believed the 10 spies that came back and said, we can't take the land. And that's why God turned to them and said, now you go back out in the wilderness and you're going to die. All of you. And that's what we read in chapters 1 through 4. We were reading that list of all those people, and we said, those are all people that are going to die, right? They were above 20 years old and above. Okay, and I'm emphasizing that here is because I think it's important for us to grasp a concept from this that is for our learning. See, I'm connecting back to where I started. For our learning, what I have to learn is that no matter where I am in my journey of faith, and faith is a journey. You obey the gospel because your faith, right? You know where you are, you know what God wants you to be, you know who you want to be, so you obey the gospel. But your faith is very small, right? Kind of weak even. And as you study and as you mature, your faith grows, right? But the problem is you never get to this place to where your faith cannot be damaged. You never get to this place where your faith cannot be tempted. You cannot be tempted to turn away from it. You cannot get to this place to where you can sit back and say, well, I finally got there. I finally made it. I can retire and, live off of my pension of faith. You don't get there. We're talking about a nation of people that what's continuously being emphasized as we went through the end of Leviticus and the beginning of Numbers, and as we talk about this Passover, what's continuously being emphasized is these people did everything God asked them to do. That takes faith. Especially when you're talking about the strenuous nature of some of these laws. I mean, sacrifices every day, morning and evening, burning of incense, and the showbread, and the way the sacrifices had to be made, and the Day of Atonement, and the sending off the scapegoat, and the way everything was constructed, and the way that they camp, and the way that they travel. Do you see the regulations, how strict all of this was? To go through all of that in such detail, does it not take a significant level of faith? Because I know what we would do. We would do the same thing we do today, and that is, come on, isn't there an easier way? A simpler way? I have no doubt they were just like that, but they did it, and they did it because their faith is strong. So they were just a few days away from this big test that they fail, and they're doing everything exactly the way God tells them to do. The lesson I need to get is I don't ever get to that place where I get to sit back and say, well, I finally made it. I'm in no danger anymore. Because we're always in danger. Did Peter say the devil is walking about as a what? Roaring lion? Anybody going to go out into, the Sahara and sit back and say, I made it. I got here. No reason to worry. If I'm sleeping, you better be awake. Right? And that's the way it is with our faith. We've got to be awake. So they do everything. Everything just like God says. All right, verse 6. Now, there were certain men who were defiled by the dead body of a man. Wait, let me stop there. What does that mean? What? That they were defiled by the dead body of a man? They touched the dead body. They had to. Regulations. You remember as we went through, especially the end of the book of Leviticus, we talked about the fact people were going to die, right? And is it healthy and sanitary to just say somebody died and they just let them lay there and decompose? Is that healthy and sanitary and good? No. And so God gave them regulations, right? Besides the fact that you didn't know always what caused the person to die, right? And that might be a danger to everybody else, right? So what God said to them was they had a responsibility to carry that body outside the camp where everybody would be safe. But the problem is now the people that carried them, well, what about them? They could be unsafe too, couldn't they? And so there were things that they had to do, washings and changing of clothes and days that they had to be away from other people so that they would be safe. But that brings up a dilemma. What if there are regulations set forth by God under this law and you can't do both? What if you can't do both? So here's the deal. We're going to read part of it here. Here's the deal. God told them what to do when somebody died, didn't they? And they have to do it if they're going to do what God tells them to do, right? And they can't say, well, I'll just wait. What happens if somebody dies on the 13th day of the first day? Well, Passover's tomorrow, so let's just let this body lay here for a couple days. They can't do that, can they? They have to take that body out of the camp. Well, then the problem is they're unclean. And if they're unclean, how can they come back in the camp and celebrate the position where they cannot do both? So here's a question. How to do? Do you figure out what's more important? How do you choose what to do? But he told them to do both. He told them to do both. I think there's an answer in this text. And I'm not going to be dogmatic about it, but I do think there's an answer in this text. But I want to read the whole thing before I tell you that answer, or at least what I think the answer is. Verse 6. Now there were certain men who were defiled by the dead body of a man, so that they could not keep the Passover on that day. And they came before Moses and Aaron that day, and those men said to him, "We became defiled by the dead body of a man. Why are we kept from presenting the offering of the Lord at its appointed time among the children of Israel?" And Moses said to them, "Stand still, that I may hear what the Lord will command concerning you." Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any one of you or your posterity is unclean because of a dead body, or is far away on a journey, he may still keep the Lord's Passover. On the 14th day of the second month, at twilight, they may keep it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall leave none of it until morning, nor break one of its bones. According to all the ordinances of the Passover, they shall keep it. But the man who is, well, let me stop with that one just a minute. Stop in verse 12. So what was the answer? These men, because they had touched the body, whatever day it was, whether it was the 13th day of the month or whatever it was, they had touched this dead body because God had told them they've got to get this body out of the camp, right? They had a job to do. Now, the problem is that made them unclean on the 14th, so they couldn't participate in the Passover. So their question is, we wanted to do what was right. We couldn't do it because we had done what God told us to do before. So what can we do? And they went to Moses, and Moses went to God, and what God told them to do? Next month, he allowed them to celebrate on the second month on the 14th day, exactly a month later, but there was a restriction. It had to be done exactly the same. Just because God had made this exception for them did not mean that they could just change everything. They had to do it the same way. Now, here's the question the dilemma that I want to propose again and tell you what I think the answer is, and that is, what do you do when there's something that God has had you to do, and there's another thing that God has had you to do, and you cannot do both? The first thing. That's what these people did, and God accepted it. They did the first thing. You can't say, well, I think this law of God is more important than this law of God. What law of God is lesser important? You know, I'll ask you this way. The plan of salvation. Every account in the New Testament where somebody was saved ended with the step of immersion in water. That's where they were saved. Every single account. Now, what happens is people start to get in their head, that means that's the important part. Right? That's the important part. So here's a question. What if somebody doesn't believe, but they're married to somebody who pushes them really hard, and so to make peace at home, they come up here and they say, well, I want to be baptized, and so you baptize them. Are they saved because they did the most important part? No. Why not? Because it's not the most important part. Every part's important. All are significant. There's no law of God that is insignificant. And so what I'm saying is what these people did was what was right first. They had to take care of what God said to take care of. When He said to take care of words, they would deal with what they had to deal with. So deal with what God has given you to do today. All right, so let's keep reading because there's another problem. 13. But the man who is clean and ceases to keep the Passover, that same person among his people, because he did not bring the offering of. And if a stranger sojourns among you and would keep the Passover, he must do so according to the rite of the Passover and according to its ceremony. You shall have one order native of the land. And I'm going to fix this microphone. That really bothers me. I don't know what to do about it, but it is what it is. Okay, so what was the problem with the exception?
Well, he could, but he didn't.
That's what's different here. So I've got somebody who could not celebrate the Passover, so God make an exception. So here's my reasoning then. Well, He let them get away with it, so I will willingly choose to do it. Did that work? No, that doesn't work. Now I'll use an example. First day of the week. I'm going to really get in trouble here, but I got time. And I'll put my mask on in a minute. You won't recognize me, so you won't know who to get onto. First day of the week. What does God expect of us? Assembly for worship, right? And the last 6 months or so, has that always been possible? No. We have been able to assemble, but we've had to do it smaller, haven't we? Sometimes we've even had to do it with just our own family, haven't we? Some have had to do it by themselves. Does God accept worship? Yes, He does. So now we get into a time where maybe we still have some struggles that we have to say, you know what, it's not safe for me to be here, or I have health issues, I can't be there, things that prevent us. But there's the rest of us who say, I could go golfing this morning or fishing this morning, and then I just watch it online tonight. Or I could travel today and just go next week or watch it online. Or, tell you the truth, hate to say this, I kind So I sure like that better than a tie. So maybe I'll just stay home. Is there a difference?
Yep.
There's a big difference. One was a situation where I could not. One was a situation where I would not. That's the difference. And that's what happens with these people. You have one group of men who were wanting to do everything they could do that God asked them to do, and they took that body out, and as a consequence of that, they could not celebrate the Passover. The other person said, you know what, I didn't want to do it today. I'll do it later. Whatever other reason they gave, they just chose not to. God said, that just doesn't work. All right, keep reading. And if a stranger sojourns among you and would keep the Passover, he must do so according to the rite of the Passover, and according to its ceremony, you shall have one ordinance both for the stranger and the native of the land. Now, this introduces us to a pattern that's going to continue, and that is there are others who could be a part of this covenant. Others could be a part of this covenant. And when you get to the New Testament, the early disciples of Jesus had been a part of this covenant. You know, we read about, does anyone remember who was the first Gentile convert? Cornelius was. But that was a part of the new covenant. He was the first Gentile. There were those who had proselyted who were a part of the church before Cornelius was. What did that mean to proselyte? Basically, it means to do that. It means to convert. What it meant is you were to have to say, I'm not that person anymore. I will take on the restrictions of your several things. And even in doing so, freedoms. In fact, there's the account. You remember a guy by the name of Philip? Remember him in the New Testament? And you remember he was teaching a guy in a chariot? Remember who that guy was? He was a eunuch. Yeah, that's what we know about him. We don't know who he was. He's a eunuch, right? You know where he had been before Philip taught him? He'd been to Jerusalem to worship and not even able to go into the temple to worship because of restrictions. But those restrictions, the limitations, did not give you the freedom to choose to do things however you wanted to. You still had to do it God's way. And so that's the same way with the Passover here. Okay, we're not going to get anywhere close to done if I don't get moving. 15. And on the day that the tabernacle was raised up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony. From evening until morning, it was above the tabernacle like the appearance of fire. So it was always. The cloud covered it by day and the appearance of fire by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, after that the children of Israel would journey, and in the place where the cloud settled, there the children of Israel would pitch their tents. And the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey, and at the command of the Lord they would camp. As long as the cloud stayed above the tabernacle, they remained encamped. Even when the cloud many days above the tabernacle, the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not journey. So, the command of the Lord, they would remain encamped, and according to the command of the Lord, when the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they would journey, whether by day or by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up, they would journey, whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year, that the cloud remained above the tabernacle. The children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. But when it was taken up, they would journey. At the command of the Lord, they remained encamped, and at the command of the Lord, they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord at the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. I think this is antenna related, so I'm going to carry it for a little while. All right, the summary of what we just read there was this. God told them when to take off and when to stop. And he told them when to pack up and when to set up. And here's the key to it all. It didn't matter if it was a year or a day. And they didn't know what it was going to be. And so the bottom line is, I want you to think about that. Before we get, this is kind of a summary of what the next 39 years almost are going to be. And that is, when God told them to go, they did what? We read it in the first 4 chapters of Numbers. As a group, in the jobs that God had given them to do, they took down that tabernacle, those elements, and packed them away. They organized their camp in a parade, if you will. In a minute, we'll read about the trumpets that blew that told them when to do all this. And they set it up where they took off, and they marched. And then when God stopped, what did they do? They stopped. They set up the tabernacle. They set up the elements. They set up the courtyard. Then they set up their own camp, and they stayed. And tomorrow morning, maybe, they packed it all up and went again. You know what? I'm going to admit something to you. If I'm one of those guys that has to pack that thing and set it up at night, I'd kind of like to know how long it's going to be up. Yeah. Right? I'd like to know how long it's going to be up because I want to know what's going to happen tomorrow. Do I get to rest tomorrow? Or are we going to be here a year? Or if I got to go get some rest because tomorrow morning I got to start doing this again. But here's the thing. I'd also like to know when the Lord's going to come back. Wouldn't you? And the truth is, probably not a good idea for me to know that. Because if I did know that, I think I would be more tempted to say, I'll wait. I've still got 3 years or 10 years or even 3 days. But if I knew it was going to be tomorrow, what would I be doing tonight? Here's a question. If you knew it was going to be Monday, are you going to be in your pajamas Sunday morning? Yeah, me either. If I am in my pajamas, it's still going to be here. So they didn't know, but here's what they did. They had the faith to do it the way God told them to do it, didn't they? Okay, chapter 10 now. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Make 2 silver trumpets for yourself. Make them of hammered work, and you shall use them for calling the assembly and for directing the movement of the camps. When they blow both of them, all the assembly shall gather before you at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So they got 2 trumpets now, and they're supposed to make them, and they're supposed to be used for something. And we're going to read some summary again, too, because this is not just for a one-time event, right? This is for the rest of their history, as long as their law is in place, and certainly as long as they are journeying. And in this case, they have 2 trumpets, and if they blow both of them at the same time, everybody in the camp is supposed to gather on the east side of the tabernacle. That's where the gate was, the east side of the tabernacle, and they were supposed to be there for some kind of proclamation, whether it was, a Day of Atonement kind of thing, an instruction from Moses kind of thing, a preparation for journey, whatever. If they blew the trumpet, both trumpets at the same time, they were supposed to gather on the east side. But, verse 4, if they blow only one, then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel shall gather to you. Now, I think there's probably a little more here than what's just being given, because if you're in a group of 2 million people, it's going to be hard to tell whether there's more than one trumpet, right? Unless there's actually some kind of a distinctive sound that they're making. So one of them's making one sound, one of them's making another sound, you'll be able to tell there's 2 of them, right? And if you're only hearing one sound, then you know it's only one trumpet. So if it's only one trumpet, who gathers? The leaders. And that would be to learn something that was a responsibility or to learn something from God and then take it back to the people, right? Okay, keep going. When you sound the advance, the camps that lie on the east side shall then begin their journey. Now, this kind of an advance is not the charge, right? This is not the cavalry blowing the charge sound. This is, it's time to move. God's moving, time for us to move. And so the first thing they do is they blow a trumpet, and what happens? The east side starts walking. Okay? When you sound the advance the second time, then the camps that lie on the south side shall begin their journey. They shall sound the call for them to begin their journeys. That's what we read in chapters 1 through 4, the way they're supposed to take off. The groups in the east go first, then the groups on the south. But look at this, verse 7. And when the congregation is to be gathered together, you shall blow, but not sound the advance. So that advance has got to be some kind of a unique sound, right? So he says, this is different. The sons of Aaron, the priests, shall blow the trumpets, and these shall be to you as an ordinance forever throughout your generations. When you go to war in your land against the enemy who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, and you will be remembered before the Lord your God, and you will be saved from your enemies. Also in the day of your gladness in your appointed feast, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be a memorial for you before your God. I am the Lord your God. A lot of more things to remember again. You got trumpets gathering everybody together. You got trumpet gathering the leaders together. You got trumpets saying, here's where we go, when we go, and here's a trumpet saying the next group goes next. You got trumpets over your charge into battle. God's going to go with you if you do it this way. Keep everybody together. You got trumpets to celebrate. You got trumpets to pull everybody through to your feast. They got to remember all this stuff. And how are they doing it? exactly the way God tells them to do it, right? Okay, so let's get back to this travel thing, the trumpet for the travel. 11. Came to pass on the 20th day of the second month. I think it's important that there's a date here because God waited for those men who couldn't celebrate the Passover the first month to do it, didn't he? But yet here they are right after it. On the 20th day, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai on their journeys, and then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So they started out for the first time according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. Now that's just a summary. All he says is, this almost is a test. Do you know how far it was from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea? Does anybody know? 11 days. That's not that long of a journey, is it? Why stop at 3? It's a test. Are you going to do it the way God tells you to do it? And here they are. Now they're only 8 days, at least by walking distance from Kadesh Barnea. And they've done everything the way God told them to do it. Do you see what I was talking about how close we can be to failure if we let our guard down? Okay, keep going. Verse 14. The standard, here's how they did it. The standard of the camp set out first according to their armies. Over their army was Nashon, the son of Amminadab. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Issachar was Nethaneel, the son of Zuar. Over the army of the children of Zebulun was Eliab, the son of Helon. Now, first trumpet blows, the east goes. Who is first? Judah. Was Judah the oldest? He was not. But there was some prophetic nature behind that statement. Where was the Messiah coming from? Judah. The Messiah is going to show up from Judah. He's going to lead the way. This is symbolic of what was coming. Judah packs up first and they travel. But then there's something else. Verse 17. Then the tabernacle was taken down, and the sons of Gershon and the sons of Merari set out carrying the tabernacle. Now, we read about those guys. They're Levites, right? And their job was that external elements of the tabernacle. And the standard of the camp of Reuben set out according to their armies. Over the army was Eliezer, the son of Shedeur. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Simeon was Shelumiel, the son of Zerashadai. And over the army of the tribe of the children of Gad was Eliasaph, the son of Deuel. So now we've got the south group going. So we had the east group, and then we've got certain of the Levites carrying the external part of the tabernacle, and then we have the south. Why do you suppose he put those people there? Well, don't answer yet. Keep reading. 21. Then the Kohathites set out carrying the holy things. Stop there. Carrying the holy things. So the descendants of Kohath had the responsibility of carrying the holy things. What were those? The ark? The candlestick or lampstand, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, all those items that were part of their worship, they carried them. Why aren't they carrying them with the people that carried the tabernacle? Well, let's read that again, 21. Then the Kohathites set out carrying the holy things. The tabernacle would be prepared for their arrival. What did I say earlier about the parade of 2 million people? Yeah, it's going to be pretty spread out, right? So as the east group takes off, before the south group takes off, and Aaron and his sons have already packed everything up, right? So the people that are carrying the outside stuff take off. And the skeleton or whatever, the framework or whatever, they take off. Then goes the south, then goes the ark and stuff, and by the time they get to camp, those people have already set up the tabernacle. And when the ark and everything arrives, it goes right into its place because at nighttime, what do they got to do? Sacrifice and burn incense and keep those lamps burning, right? So they do it in order, and everybody could say, I think it'd be better to do it this way. But God said, do it this way. And if you do it my way, guess what? Things are going to get simpler. Keep going. 22. And the standard of the camp of the children of Ephraim set out according to their armies. Over the army was Elishama, the son of Ammihud. I'm not going to pronounce these right, but that's okay. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Manasseh was Gamaliel, the son of Pedazur. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Benjamin was Abidan, the son of Gideoni, that's the west side. You had the east, you had part of the Levites, you had the south, you had the Kohathites, now you got the west. Then the standard of the camp of the children of Dan, which formed the rear guard of all the camps, set out according to their armies. Over their army was Ahiezer, the son of Ammishaddai. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Asher was Pagiel, the son of Ochran. And over the army of the tribe of the children of Naphtali was Ahira, the son of Enan. This was the order of march of the children of Israel according to their armies when they began their journey. So guess what? They did it like God said. Exactly like God said. That's a lot of work. Okay, now there's an interesting account that starts here right now. Before we read it, I want to ask a question. Do you remember, you remember where Moses was when he fled Egypt? He's out in the wilderness or the desert, right? What was he doing?
Eating grasshoppers.
What was his job? He was a shepherd. For whose sheep? Jethro. Who's Jethro? His father-in-law. He's also named Reuel. And you remember as they began their journey, Reuel or Jethro kind of gave some guidance to Moses, didn't he? And he said, it's too much. You're not going to be able to handle all this, and so you need to organize people, and if God wants you to do this, I think this is a good way to do it. And then the text tells us he went home. We don't know what happened to him after that. I think he died. And the reason I think he died is because we're going to meet somebody here now who is, in the New King James, he's called his son. He's called Moses' brother-in-law kind of situation. The way that this account unfolds, what it leads me to believe is he has become the leader of a family. Jethro went home and with the family, and he died. And so this descendant of Jethro has now brought them evidently back to Moses at Mount Sinai. And he's now the one making the decision. So Moses' father-in-law has most likely at this point died. Verse 29. Now Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, so see, he is the son of Reuel, or the son of Jethro, and Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. We are setting out for the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will treat you well, for the Lord has promised good things to Israel. And he said to him, I will not go, but I will depart to my own land and to my kinsmen. So Moses basically says to, who's his wife? Do you remember his wife's name? Nobody names their daughter this anymore. Well, that's a good one too, but no. Her name was Zipporah. Wait, does anybody name their kid Zipporah? Does anybody know a Zipporah? Okay, so that's a good statement then. So Zipporah is his wife. This is her family, right? And so they're going to go back home. It's going to be hard on her. I mean, think about it. They're living out there with his family, right? Or her family, right? And then Moses goes back into Egypt, and now all of a sudden here a year later, she says, see you later for the rest of your life. Not an easy thing, is it? So what Moses asked him to do is come with us. Bring your family with us. It's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult, but you can be a part of this covenant. And he says, no, we're going to go back home. All right, keep reading. He said to him, I will not go, but I'll depart to my own land to my kinsmen. So Moses said, please do not leave, inasmuch as you know how we are to camp in the wilderness, and you can be our eyes. You got something to offer. We need you. He's asking for a leader, right? Okay. It shall be if you go with us, indeed it shall be that whatever good the Lord will do to us, the same will be to you. So they departed from the mountain of the Lord on a journey of 3 days, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them for the 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was above them by day when they went out from the camp. So it was, I won't read that, but Moses cried, I'll tell you in just a minute. Basically, what happens is he goes. He sacrifices everything to go with God's people because God will bless him and his family as well. That's a commitment. That's what he challenges us to do as well. No matter what we got to leave behind, we go walk with him. Got to have the faith to do it. Exactly like he says. Now, I'm out of time, so I don't want to read it, but Moses has a cry. Every time they go to take off, he has this kind of shout of victory, and every time they stop, he calls back into the camp. Well, they're not going for any battle yet. They're just going to journey for 40 years, right? So this is all in preparation. They are preparing for what's coming. Every time they take off, they're going to know God's leading the way. And every time they stop, they're going to know God's in the middle of the camp. And they're going to know that until they're fighting their battles, so that they'll know that when they're fighting their battles. Okay, let's close with a prayer. Father, we're so thankful for the opportunity to be here tonight to study your word, and we're so thankful for these examples. We pray, Father, that we will recognize the importance of our faith and stay strong every day, and even when we struggle, recognize the need to turn back to you and walk with you. Help us, Father, to grow. Help us to glorify you and trust not in ourselves, but only in you. Forgive us where we fail you. In Christ's name, amen.